of everything humanity has sacrificed for 10,000 years. Every prayer whispered in the darkness, every drop of blood spilled across 1,000,000 worlds. Every soul fed daily to the golden throne has all been for a God who never wanted to be one. The galaxy burns. It has always burned. In the dying light of the 41st millennium, humanity clings to existence not through strength, but through sheer, desperate faith in a being who sits motionless upon a throne of gold and agony. 10,000 years of torment, 10,000 years of silence. The Emperor of mankind, master of the Imperium, Lord of Terra, speaks no more. His body, a withered husk wrapped in failing flesh, sustained only by the psychic screams of 1,000 souls sacrificed each day to keep the astronomicon burning. And yet, despite this horror, despite the mountains of corpses and rivers of blood that flow in his name, humanity endures. Because they believe. They believe in him. Who is he, really? What manner of being could inspire such devotion, such madness? What kind of entity would allow himself to become the God he once denied? The answers lie buried beneath millennia of propaganda, religious fervor, and carefully constructed lies. The Imperium teaches that the Emperor has always been divine, that he walked among humanity as a golden savior, guiding mankind toward its manifest destiny among the stars. But the truth, as it always does in this universe, cuts deeper. The Emperor was not born in some mythic golden age. He was not conjured from prayer or prophecy. He was made, forged in an age so ancient that even the Eldar Empire was yet to rise, shaped by the collective sacrifice of shamans who saw the corruption seeping into humanity's soul, and chose to become something more, something eternal. Imagine it. The Earth, primitive and young, were psychic shamans who could reincarnate and will begin to notice something terrible. The warp, that mirror dimension of thought and emotion, was growing dark. Souls that once returned to the cycle of rebirth were being lost, devoured by entities that fed on human suffering. And so, in an act of unprecedented desperation, these shamans performed a ritual. All of them, at once, across the world. They drank poison. They slit their wrists. They ended their lives in unity, and in that moment their souls merged within the warp, coalescing into a single, impossibly powerful consciousness. A Gestalt entity. A weapon designed to protect humanity from the predations of chaos. He was born screaming into existence, ancient before he took his first breath. For thousands of years, he walked among humanity, wearing countless faces, manipulating history from the shadows. He was the wanderer, the advisor, the warrior king, the prophet who never claimed divinity. He guided civilizations in their infancy, watched empires rise and crumble, nudged the course of human development towards some grand design only he could perceive. In ancient Mesopotamia, he might have been a king. In ancient Rome, perhaps a senator whispering wisdom into the ears of emperors. Always watching, always waiting. But what was he waiting for? The age of strife gave him his answer. When humanity reached out to colonize the stars, when mankind achieved a golden age of science and reason, the warp convulsed in fury. Warp storms tore through reality, cutting off human colonies from one another, isolating them in darkness and madness. The birth of Slaanesh, youngest of the Chaos Gods, shattered the Eldar Empire and sent shockwaves through the galaxy that would reshape the destiny of every living species. Terra itself was besieged, its people regressing into techno-barbarian warlords who fought over the ruins of a once great civilization. It was then that the Emperor revealed himself, not as a shadowy advisor, but as a conqueror. Being of such overwhelming power that psychic lightning crackled from his fingertips, and his very presence could break the will of warlords who had carved kingdoms from the ashes of old Earth. He emerged from his hidden laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, where he had labored in secret, crafting the tools he would need to reshape humanity. The Thunder Warriors, his first genetically engineered super soldiers, brutal and unstoppable, swept across Terra like an avenging storm. The Unification Wars began, and with them, the Emperor's dream took its first bloody steps toward reality. He did not unify Terra through diplomacy. He did it through subjugation, through calculated genocide, through the complete and utter annihilation of anyone who refused to bend the knee. Techno-barbarians fell. The gene cults were purged. Petty warlords who had ruled the radioactive wastes were dragged from their fortresses and executed. And when the world was finally united under his banner, the Emperor looked to the stars and saw his next battlefield stretching out before him like a canvas waiting to be painted in fire. The Great Crusade, humanity's finest hour, or so they tell you. 20 Primarchs, his sons, genetically crafted to be the pinnacle of human potential, each a demigod in their own right. 20 legions of space marines, the Adeptus Astartes, warriors who knew no fear and would fight to the last breath for their father's dream. The dream of a secular Imperium, a galaxy united under the banner of imperial truth, where superstition and religion would be cast aside, and humanity would claim its birthright as the rightful rulers of the galaxy. No gods, no kings, only humanity ascending through reason and strength. But the Chaos Gods watched, and they laughed, because the Emperor, in his infinite wisdom and towering arrogance, made a mistake. He underestimated the power of belief. He underestimated love, resentment, ambition, and pride. He underestimated his own sons. Horus, the favored son, the war master, the one the Emperor trusted above all others to lead his armies while he returned to Terra for a project shrouded in mystery. What project could be so important that the master of mankind would abandon his great crusade at its height? A secret labor demanded his full attention while the galaxy burned under the tread of his legions. The answer would doom humanity for 10,000 years. Horus fell, corrupted by chaos, twisted by whispers and visions that promised him godhood. He turned half the Primarchs and their legions against their father. Brother fought brother. Legions that had once stood shoulder to shoulder in unity now tore each other apart in the bloodiest civil war the galaxy had ever witnessed. Worlds burned. Entire star systems were rendered lifeless. At the climax of it all, Horus led his traitor forces to Terra itself, besieging the cradle of humanity in a final, desperate gambit to kill the Emperor and claim the throne for himself. The Emperor confronted his son aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Horus's flagship. What passed between them in that final confrontation is known only through fragments, myths, and contradictory accounts. But what is known is this: the Emperor hesitated. He could not bring himself to strike down his most beloved son. And in that moment of hesitation, Horus struck. The blow was catastrophic, empowered by all for Chaos Gods, tearing through the Emperor's defenses and ravaging his immortal body. Only when a lone Imperial soldier, a nameless warrior whose courage eclipsed even that of Primarchs, interposed himself between father and son and was obliterated for his defiance, only then did the Emperor see the truth. Horus was gone. His son was nothing more than a puppet of chaos. And so, the Emperor unleashed his full might. He destroyed Horus utterly, erasing his soul from existence, denying the Chaos Gods their prize, but the damage was done. The Emperor's body was shattered beyond repair, his life force fading with every passing second. They brought him back to Terra. They placed him upon the Golden Throne, an ancient device of unknown origin meant to power the human webway project he had been constructing in secret. Now it became his prison, his life support, a machine that could sustain his psychic might but could never heal his broken form. Thousands psychers are sacrificed every day to feed the throne, their souls consumed to keep the astronomicon lit, the psychic beacon that allows humanity to navigate the warp. And there he sits, rotting, silent, watching. But the question remains, gnawing at the edges of every scholar who dares to study the forbidden texts, every inquisitor who has peered too deeply into the nature of the Emperor's divinity. Is he truly silent, or is he simply waiting? The Imperium preaches that he protects, that even now, entombed within the Golden Throne, the Emperor's will radiates across the galaxy, guiding his faithful, shielding them from the predations of chaos. The Ecclesiarchy has built a religion around his silence, transforming the secular imperial truth into the very thing he fought to destroy. 10 billion worlds pray to him. Trillions of souls cry out his name in moments of desperation. And perhaps in some terrible, twisted way, their faith is not misplaced, because something answers. The living saints walk among the faithful, warriors bathed in golden light, resurrected from death to fight in his name, performing miracles that defy rational explanation. The sisters of battle wield faith as a weapon, their prayers manifesting as shields against demonic assault, their righteous fury burning heretics with holy fire. And then there are the visions. Gilliman himself, the returned Primarch, the Lord Regent of the Imperium, has spoken with his father. What does it mean when even a Primarch, a demigod forged to be humanity's champion, looks upon his creator and sees a stranger? There are theories, of course. whispered in the darkest chambers of the Inquisition, debated by radical factions who risk execution for even entertaining such thoughts. First theory is simple: the Emperor is dying. The Golden Throne is failing, its mechanisms grinding down after 10 millennia of constant operation, and when it finally collapses, the Emperor's death will trigger a psychic cataclysm that will tear Terra apart and birth a new eye of terror at the heart of the Imperium. Humanity will be annihilated in an instant, their empire crumbling as the warp consumes everything they have built. The second theory is worse. The Emperor is not dying, he is ascending. 10,000 years of worship, 10,000 years of countless trillions believing him to be divine have fed him just as surely as the daily sacrifice of psychers. Faith in the warp is power. If enough souls believe in a god, if enough psychic energy is directed toward a single focal point, then perhaps that god becomes real. Perhaps the Emperor, who denied his own divinity, who fought to keep humanity rational and secular, has been forced by the sheer weight of belief to become exactly what he never wanted to be. A warp entity, fifth chaos god, born not of a single emotion but of humanity's desperate hope, their fear, their need for a protector in a universe that offers only darkness. And if that is true, then what happens when he finally breaks free? The third theory is the one that keeps even the most hardened inquisitors awake at night, staring into the void and questioning everything they have ever believed. What if the Emperor planned all of this? What if his silence, his imprisonment, his transformation into a god were all part of some vast design that spans not just millennia, but epochs beyond human comprehension? The Emperor has always played the long game. He orchestrated the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the construction of the Webway. He foresaw the Horus heresy, some claim he allowed it to happen. That he knew Horus would fall and did nothing to prevent it, because the alternative was somehow worse. What if his entombment upon the Golden Throne was not a tragedy but a calculated move? A necessary sacrifice to achieve some objective that mortal minds cannot grasp. But then why does humanity suffer? Why allow the Imperium to rot from within, consumed by corruption, bureaucracy, and dogma? Why permit the rise of the Inquisition's tyranny, the senseless wars that grind up billions of lives for inches of territory, the slow decay of the very empire he sacrificed everything to build? Unless suffering itself is the point, there is a place deep within the Imperial Palace where even custodians dare not tread without explicit permission. A vault sealed by psychic wards so powerful that approaching it without protection drives men mad. Within that vault lies a text ancient beyond measure, written in a language that predates humanity itself. Only the highest echelons of the Inquisition know of its existence, and those who have read it are forever changed. The text speaks of a prophecy, or perhaps a warning, from a Xenos race that died out long before mankind left Terra. It describes a being of impossible power, a shepherd of stars who will guide his people through an age of darkness so profound that it will make all previous suffering seem trivial by comparison. But the prophecy contains a paradox. The shepherd must become the wolf. The protector must devour. And when the final darkness comes, when the galaxy itself begins to die, only then will the shepherd's purpose be fulfilled. The Imperium does not speak of this text. It cannot, because to acknowledge it would be to question the very foundation of their faith. Across the galaxy, events are accelerating. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, has torn reality in half, splitting the Imperium into two isolated halves and flooding the Materium with warp energy on a scale not seen since the Age of Strife. Demons pour through tears in reality. Legion forces emerge from the Eye of Terror in numbers that dwarf any previous Black Crusade, and the Necrons awaken from their 60 million year slumber with technologies that make a mockery of humanity's greatest achievements. The Tyranid Hive fleets converge on the galaxy from every direction, and extragalactic swarms so vast that entire sectors are consumed in their path. The Tau expand their empire, preaching their philosophy of the greater good, while humanity bleeds on 1,000 fronts. The Eldar watch from their craft worlds, knowing secrets they refuse to share, burdened by the knowledge that their own arrogance birthed a god that nearly destroyed the galaxy. And through it all, the Emperor sits silent, but his sons do not. Gilliman has returned, the Lord of Ultramar, dragged back from the edge of death by the Inari and resurrected to find an Imperium he barely recognizes. He has taken up the mantle of Lord Regent, attempting to stem the tide of collapse through military reform, political maneuvering, and sheer force of will. But even he knows it is not enough. The Imperium is too vast, too broken, too corrupted by its own weight. For every world he saves, 10 more fall into darkness, and he is not the only Primarch to walk among the living once more. In the Eye of Terror, Mortarion spreads his plagues across Imperial worlds, his Death Guard Legion turning entire planets into disease-ridden wastelands. Magnus the Red Skein from the planet of sorcerers, his 1,000 sons wielding sorceries that bend reality itself. Angren, elevated to daemonhood, leads his world eaters in frenzies of blood and slaughter that leave nothing but corpses in his wake. Fulgrim pursues perfection through excess, his emperor's children having long since descended into depths of depravity that would make even Slaanesh proud. The traitor Primarchs have become everything their father fought against, and yet they were his sons once. He created them, he raised them, taught them, trusted them. Their corruption is his failure, their betrayal is his legacy. But what of the loyal sons? Where are they? Legends persist. Sightings of figures matching their descriptions, always at the edges of reality, always just beyond confirmation. The lion, last seen lying in stasis within the rock. The Dark Angel's fortress monastery, his fate known only to the chapter's inner circle. Lehman Russ, who led his space wolves into the Eye of Terror in search of a cure for the corruption afflicting his chapter and never returned. Dagatai Khan, who pursued Dark Eldar raiders into the webway and vanished. Vulcan, who left his sons with the promise that he would return when they had collected all 9 of his artifacts. Corvus Corax, who entered the Eye of Terror hunting Larger and his word bearers, consumed by rage and transformed into something else, something the warp shaped into a weapon of vengeance. They're out there somewhere, scattered across a galaxy that has forgotten them. And perhaps they are waiting too, waiting for the moment when their father calls them home, or waiting for the moment when they must choose once and for all, whether to serve the god he has become or remember the man he once was. Because that is the true horror at the heart of the Imperium, not that the Emperor might die, not even that he might ascend to full godhood. The horror is that he might already be something far beyond either state, something so far removed from humanity that his grand design, if it even exists, might require humanity's destruction to achieve. An Ordo Malleus inquisitor named Karamazov once spent 40 years researching a single question. Why does the Emperor permit demons to exist? If he possesses such vast psychic power, if he can project his will across the galaxy, why not simply close the warp rifts, seal the Eye of Terror, banish chaos forever? Karamazov's conclusions, detailed in a manuscript he burned before taking his own life, suggested an answer that shattered his faith, because the Emperor needs chaos. Is that divinity, or is it something else entirely? The answer may lie in the one place no one dares to look, within the mind of the Emperor himself, lost somewhere in that vast consciousness trapped within a dying, trapped behind a psychic storm so vast that even the most powerful telepaths in the Imperium cannot penetrate it without being driven instantly insane. But one did. One tried. His name has been stricken from all records. The Inquisition saw to that. What remains are fragments, whispers pass between members of the Ordo Malleus who investigate too deeply into the nature of their god. He was a sanctioned psyker, one of the most powerful the Imperium had ever produced, a man whose psychic rating was so high that he should have been sacrificed to the Golden Throne immediately upon discovery. But he was too valuable, too gifted, and the High Lords believed he could be controlled. They gave him a task: penetrate the Emperor's consciousness, learn what he sees, understand what he has become. The psyker prepared for months. He fortified his mind with every psychic defense known to the Imperium. He prayed for weeks without sleep, purifying his soul through ritual and meditation. When he finally stood before the Golden Throne, surrounded by custodians and watched by representatives of every major imperial institution, he reached out with his consciousness and touched the mind of the Emperor. What he saw broke him. For 17 seconds, he screamed. Not in pain, though his body convulsed as if every nerve was being flayed. Not in terror, though the custodians reported that his eyes bled and his skin aged decades in those few heartbeats. He screamed because he understood. When they finally pulled him away from the throne, when they dragged his shattered form to the Medicaid chambers, he had only moments of lucidity left. The custodian commander leaned close, demanding to know what he had seen. The psyker laughed. It was the laughter of a man staring into the abyss and finding it staring back with eyes that knew his every secret, every sin, every moment of weakness. He is alone, the psyker whispered, blood bubbling from his lips. He has always been alone, and he hates us, not for our weakness, not for our failures. He hates us because we are free to die, and he is not. Then the psyker's mind shattered completely, fragmenting into 1,000 screaming pieces that the Inquisition spent weeks hunting down and exterminating as they manifested as psychic echoes. Throughout the Imperial Palace, the experiment was declared heretical. The records were sealed. Participants were executed or mind-wiped, and the Imperium continued, never speaking of what had been learned in those 17 seconds. But the question remains, festering like a wound that will not heal. What if the Emperor's greatest suffering is not his physical torment, not the slow decay of his body, but the isolation of his consciousness? Imagine existing for 10,000 years, aware of every moment, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. Imagine feeling the psychic death screams of 1,000 souls every single day, as they are fed to the machine that keeps you alive. Imagine watching your empire, your dream, your grand vision for humanity twist into a theocratic nightmare, worships you as the very thing you fought to prevent. Would you not grow to hate them? Will you not rage against the prison of flesh and faith that binds you? There are moments rare and terrifying when the emperors will manifest directly in the Materium. The Inquisition documents these occurrences with obsessive detail, searching for patterns, for meaning, for some hint of his divine plan. During the Third War for Armageddon, when Ingrid led his demon horde against the hive cities and all seemed lost, an Imperial guardsman named Dominic witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. He saw a space marine, a gray knight wreathed in golden fire, speaking in a voice that resonated not with sound but with pure psychic force. The voice commanded the demons to kneel, and they did, their forms flickering and weakening as if the very essence of the warp recoiled from that presence. Grey Knight himself claimed no memory of the event, insisting he had been unconscious after taking a demon's blade through his chest. Was that the Emperor's intervention, or was it something else, something using his name, his power? For purposes unknown, the Thorian faction of the Inquisition believes the Emperor can be reborn. They search the galaxy for individuals who might serve as vessels for his consciousness, holy receptacles pure enough to contain a fragment of his divine essence. They have found candidates over the centuries, men and women who exhibit unusual psychic abilities, who perform miracles, who seem touched by something greater than themselves. Each time, the Thorians perform their ritual, attempting to channel the Emperor's soul into a new body. Each time, the candidate burns from within, consumed by a power so vast that mortal flesh cannot contain even a fraction of it. The Thorians call this purification. Their enemies call it murder, but they persist, driven by faith or madness, or perhaps both, because the alternative is unthinkable. If the Emperor cannot be reborn, if he cannot be saved, then what hope does humanity have? Meanwhile, in the depths of the webway, fragments of the Emperor's greatest failures still linger. When Magnus the Red shattered the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's secret project, when he unwittingly opened a gateway that allowed demons to pour into the Imperial Palace, he doomed not just his father's dream, but potentially all of humanity. The Emperor had been building a human section of the webway, an ancient Eldar network that allows travel without entering the warp. If he had succeeded, humanity would no longer need navigators, no longer be vulnerable to chaos during warp travel. The Imperium could have expanded infinitely, safe from corruption, free from the predations of the dark gods. But Magnus's warning, his desperate attempt to tell his father about Horus's betrayal, came in the worst possible way. The psychic shockwave tore through the Emperor's wards like Alaskan through parchment. Demons flooded in. The Emperor was forced to abandon his work, to sit upon the golden throne not as a dying god, but as an eternal warden, holding shut a door that can never be closed, fighting an endless war in a dimension where time and space hold no meaning. The custodians who guard the throne know this. They stand watch over that sealed gateway, listening to the screams that echo from the other side, the sounds of their brothers who entered the webway to fight the demon tide and never returned. Thousands of custodians are still in there, locked in eternal combat, dying and fighting and dying again in a war that will never end. And the Emperor watches them fall, feeling every death, unable to help, unable to do anything but maintain the psychic barrier that keeps Terra from being consumed. Is this divine punishment, or is this simply the consequence of hubris, of a being so convinced of his own infallibility that he could not imagine his own sons turning against him? Lorgar, Primarch of the Word Bearers, claimed to have found the truth on the demon world of Cadia, in the depths of the Eye of Terror. Before his corruption, Lorgar had worshipped the Emperor as a god, building temples and spreading the faith despite his father's furious rebukes. The Emperor had humiliated him, forcing him and his entire legion to kneel in the ashes of a city they had spent decades converting to the Imperial cult, a city the Emperor ordered destroyed because it represented everything he despised. That humiliation broke something in Lorgar. It sent him searching for real gods, for beings who would accept his worship rather than reject it. And he found them. Chaos gods welcomed him with open arms, showing him visions of the past and future, revealing truths the Emperor had hidden. Lorgar learned that his father had made pacts with the dark gods, that the power used to create the Primarchs came not from science alone, but from bargains struck in the deepest parts of the warp. The Emperor had stolen from Chaos, taking their power and using it to create his sons, believing he could control what he had wrought. Chaos gods allowed it because they knew what the Emperor did not, that stolen power always demands payment. And when the time came, they would claim what was theirs. The Primarchs were always meant to fall. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough. Enough to wound the Emperor. Enough to ensure his imprisonment upon the Golden Throne. Enough to transform humanity's protector into its eternal prisoner, watching helplessly as his species suffers. But why? What purpose does it serve for the Chaos Gods to keep the Emperor alive? They could have killed him during the heresy. Horus had him at his mercy, could have struck the final blow and ended it all. Instead, the Emperor was allowed to destroy Horus and crawl back to the Golden Throne. Why? The answer might lie in the nature of the warp itself. Chaos feeds on emotion, on suffering, on the psychic energy generated by trillions of souls experiencing fear, rage, despair, and hope. An Imperium without the Emperor would collapse within years, devolving into petty kingdoms that would either be consumed by Xenos or fall to Chaos worship. But an Imperium with the Emperor, with a dying god who demands constant sacrifice, who inspires endless devotion and generates infinite suffering, is a feast that will last forever. Chaos gods do not want to kill the Emperor. They want to keep him exactly where he is, suffering eternally, serving as the cornerstone of a system that generates more psychic energy than any other civilization in the galaxy. The Emperor is not humanity's protector. He is their ultimate predator, and his prison is the cage that keeps them, feeding him their faith, their hope, their souls. Unless, of course, this is exactly what he wants them to believe. What if the Emperor's greatest deception is not his divinity, but his helplessness? What if every vision, every miracle, every manifestation of his will is carefully calculated to maintain the Imperium exactly as it is? What if he has been awake this entire time, fully conscious, fully aware, orchestrating events across the galaxy with the same cold precision he used during the Great Crusade? A tech priest on Mars, deep in the archives of the Mechanicum, discovered something that cost him his life, a fragment of data ancient and corrupted. That suggested the Golden Throne's deterioration is not mechanical failure but programmed obsolescence, as if someone designed it to fail slowly over millennia, creating a crisis that would force the Imperium into exactly the kind of desperation that makes civilizations do unthinkable things. The tech priest's name was Archmago's Call. No, that's incorrect. This was centuries before Belisarius Call's time, though perhaps the confusion is intentional, buried in layers of misdirection. This tech priest, whose designation has been corrupted from all data logs, followed the fragment like a thread through the labyrinth of Mars's deepest vaults. What he discovered was a schematic, one that predated the Horus heresy, showing modifications to the Golden Throne that had never been implemented. but rather modifications that were listed as not yet implemented, as if the throne's current configuration was merely a phase, a temporary state waiting for the right moment to transition into something else entirely. The night he transmitted his findings to a contact in the Inquisition, his laboratory was consumed by a plasma fire, so intense it melted through 6 levels of the Mechanicum Forge. Body was recovered. No data survived, but whispers persist among the Martian priesthood of a schematic that shows the Golden Throne, not as a life support system, but as a chrysalis, a transformation engine designed to reshape something mortal into something that transcends mortality itself. If that is true, then every psyker sacrificed, every prayer offered, every ounce of faith directed toward the Emperor is not sustaining him, it is changing him, feeding a metamorphosis that has been 10,000 years in the making, and what emerges from a 10,000-year chrysalis built from the souls of humanity's most faithful. The signs are everywhere for those who dare to look. The Astronomicon burns brighter than it ever has, yet requires more psychers to maintain. Why would a dying beacon grow stronger? The living saints appear with increasing frequency, performing miracles that defy even the most generous interpretations of psychic phenomena. Gilliman's resurrection was facilitated by the Inari, yes, but when he awoke, when he took his first breath in 10,000 years, he heard a voice, his father's voice. Not words exactly, but a presence that acknowledged him, that reached across the gulf between godhood and mortality to touch his mind with something that felt almost like anticipation. The Primarch has not spoken publicly about what passes between him and the Emperor. During his visits to the throne room, the Adeptus Custodes maintain their vigil in silence, their faces hidden behind golden helms, their thoughts unreadable. But there are moments when Gilliman emerges from those meetings and his expression carries a weight that even his transhuman physiology struggles to bear. He looks like a man who has seen the end of the universe and been told he must shepherd humanity toward it. What does the Emperor tell his son in those moments? What visions does he share? What commands does he give? In the distant segmentum, a world called so the held a device called the Pharaohs, a Necron artifact of immense power that Gilliman once used to guide his fleet during the heresy. The device was destroyed, overloaded in a desperate gambit to call for aid. But before its destruction, tech priests studying the Pharaohs discovered something unsettling in its quantum architecture. The device was not a beacon. It was a lure, a psychic lighthouse designed to attract something from outside the galaxy, something vast and hungry that the ancient Necrons had feared enough to seal away and hide. When the Pharaohs lit up with enough power to be seen across the galaxy, it sent a signal into the intergalactic void, and the Tyranids answered. What if the Emperor knew? What if the Great Rift, the return of Gilliman, the awakening of the Necrons, the arrival of the Tyranid hive fleets in numbers that threaten to consume the entire galaxy? What if all of it is part of the design? Not through direct control, but through careful manipulation, through calculated allowances, through the kind of strategic thinking that operates on timescales measured in millennia rather than mortal lifespans. The Emperor has always been willing to sacrifice for the greater good. He sacrificed the Thunder Warriors after they had served their purpose, culling his first-generation super soldiers because they were too unstable to build an empire upon. He allowed the Horus heresy to happen, perhaps even engineered it, because the alternative was a humanity united under his direct rule, but still fundamentally human, still vulnerable to chaos. But a humanity forged in the fires of eternal war, a species that knows only suffering and sacrifice, a civilization held together by faith so desperate it borders on madness. That is a weapon, as a tool capable of surviving what comes next, because something is coming. The astronomers of the Imperium do not speak of what they see in the void beyond the galaxy. The Inquisition has classified their observations at the highest levels, executing entire observational teams who glimpse too much through their telescopes. But the information leaks anyway, as it always does. Shadow and the warp phenomena growing stronger. Entire star clusters in neighboring galaxies going dark simultaneously, as if consumed by something vast enough to devour suns. Psychic screams emanating from the intergalactic medium, desperate pleas in languages unknown, civilizations dying in real time as something sweeps through them like a scythe through wheat. The Tyranids are not invading the Milky Way, they are fleeing into it, refugees from something worse, and the Emperor, locked upon his throne, feeling the psychic reverberations of apocalypses occurring millions of light years away, knows what is coming, has always known. The Great Crusade was not about reclaiming lost human worlds. It was about building an empire large enough, numerous enough, faithful enough to serve as a bulwark against threats that make chaos seem quaint by comparison. The Golden Throne is not a prison. It is an anchor, a fixed point of psychic stability in a galaxy where the warp itself is becoming increasingly unstable, where the membrane between reality and unreality grows thinner by the day. The Emperor is not dying. He is waiting, gathering power, preparing for a war that will make the Horus Heresy look like a preliminary skirmish. But even this might be optimistic thinking, the kind of hope that desperate humans cling to when the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. Because there is another interpretation of the evidence, one that the most radical elements of the Inquisition have begun to consider in sealed chambers where no servitors are permitted, where even the walls are psychically shielded against observation. What if the Emperor is already dead? What if he died 10,000 years ago aboard the Vengeful Spirit? And what sits upon the Golden Throne is merely an echo, a psychic impression so powerful it has taken on a semblance of life. What if the miracles, the visions, the manifestations of his will are not the Emperor acting, but humanity's collective belief, creating a warp entity in his image? The Chaos Gods were born from emotion, from the psychic energy of countless souls experiencing similar feelings. Love and excess created Slanesh, war and violence sustained Khorne. What would 10,000 years of worship, desperate faith from trillions upon trillions of humans create? Could it birth a god? A real god, not the man who denied his divinity, but something new. Something that wears his face and speaks with his voice, but has never known mortality. Never experienced doubt, never been human at all. This entity would not be the Emperor. It would be what humanity needs the Emperor to be. A protector, a judge, a tyrant, a savior. Whatever the situation demands, whatever the faithful pray for in their moments of greatest need, it would be infinitely adaptable, capable of being simultaneously merciful and cruel, loving and hateful, depending on what serves the Imperium's survival. It would be the perfect god for a species that has forgotten how to be human. And if that is true, then the original Emperor, the man who walked the earth for 40,000 years, who unified Terra, who created the Primarchs and launched the Great Crusade, is gone. His consciousness dissolved, absorbed into the greater whole. His identity lost in the gestalt of belief that humanity has constructed around his corpse. Perhaps that was always the plan. Perhaps the Emperor understood that he could never truly protect humanity, while remaining individual, remaining mortal in thought if not in body. Perhaps his final sacrifice was not his physical form, but his very self, allowing his consciousness to be consumed and transformed into something that could serve humanity more effectively than any single being ever could. Or perhaps it was not a choice at all. Perhaps it simply happened, the inevitable result of 10,000 years of worship, and somewhere deep within that vast psychic entity, a fragment of the original consciousness remains, screaming in horror at what it has become, unable to stop the transformation, unable to die, unable to do anything but watch as humanity turns it into their weapon, their shield, their god. The custodians stand vigil. They have stood vigil for 10,000 years, the Emperor's personal guardians, his companions, the warriors who knew him not as a god, but as their creator, their master, perhaps even their friend. They do not speak of what they know. They cannot. But sometimes, in the deep watches of the night, when even the Adeptus Custodes must rest their vigilance for the briefest of moments, they gather in chambers beneath the throne room and share stories of who he was. Not the Emperor, not the master of mankind, but him. The man they served before the galaxy knew his name, and in those stories told in hushed voices by warriors who never show emotion, never display weakness, there is a grief so profound it transcends words. Because they know the truth that no one else can bear. They were there when he fell. They carried him to the throne. They saw his eyes as he was sealed within the machine, and in those eyes was not peace, not resignation, not even pain. There was terror. The terror of a being facing an eternity of imprisonment, knowing that salvation would never come, that rescue was impossible, that this was not a temporary measure but an eternal sentence. They saw him mouth words, though no sound came. The custodians who were closest claimed they understood what he said, though they have never repeated it to anyone outside their order. But in the centuries following, 3 of those custodians walked into the webway gate and never returned. Not in service, not on orders. They simply removed their armor, laid down their guardian spears, and walked into the demon-haunted darkness as if seeking something they had lost, as if answering a call no one else could hear. What did the Emperor say in that final moment before the throne consumed him? What truth was so terrible that warriors who had stood against demon princes, who had fought beside him for centuries, who knew no fear, chose oblivion rather than carry that knowledge for another day? The answer may lie in the dreams. Across the Imperium, there are reports, suppressed, classified, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic obfuscation, but persistent nonetheless. Psychers experiencing the same vision simultaneously, even when separated by light years. The vision is always identical, a golden figure standing at the edge of an abyss, and behind him, reality itself is tearing apart. Not the warp, not chaos, something else, something that exists in the spaces between dimensions, in the gaps where causality breaks down and even the dark gods dare not tread. Figure is burning, consumed from within by fire that gives no light, and he is speaking, but the words are not sounds. They are concepts, raw meaning carved directly into the psyche of anyone who witnesses the vision. The message is simple and it is horrifying. I am holding the door. When I fall, do not mourn me. Run! Inquisitor Chevuk, one of the few humans to have walked the Black Library of the Eldar and survived, wrote in his forbidden journals about a conversation with an ancient Farseer. The Eldar, those who remember the war in heaven, those who watched their own civilization birth a god through their sins, possess a perspective on the Emperor that humanity cannot comprehend. Farseer told Chevuk that the Monkey Emperor is not unique. Throughout the galaxy's history, species have produced individuals like him, beings of immense psychic power who attempt to guide their people through times of existential crisis. Farseer listed them, the illuminated ones of the Canib, the eternal chorus of craft world Luganeth, the burning saints of extinct species whose names have been lost to time. Every single one failed, not because they were not powerful enough, not because they made mistakes, but because they succeeded. Each one became so powerful, so essential to their species' survival, that their people could not function without them. And when these beings finally died or transformed beyond recognition, their civilizations collapsed within generations, unable to adapt to existence without their guiding light. The Eldar see the Emperor not as humanity's savior but as its addiction, a drug that feels like protection but is actually poison, slowly killing the host while making them dependent on the very thing that destroys them. The Farseer asked Chevuk a question that the Inquisitor could never answer. What happens to humanity the day after the Emperor truly dies? Will they become stronger, forced to stand on their own? Or will they simply cease to function like a body whose heart has been ripped out? Chevuk never published his journals. He knew what would happen if the Inquisition found them. But copies exist, hidden in places where even the most thorough purges cannot reach. And those who read them are forced to confront an uncomfortable possibility that the Emperor's greatest enemy is not chaos, not Xenos, not even death itself. It is the Imperium. It is the very civilization he built, which has become so twisted, so dependent on his existence that it perpetuates his suffering because it cannot survive without him. The Mechanica maintains the Golden Throne not out of reverence but out of terror. They know it is failing. They have known for centuries. The original blueprints are lost. The technology is archaeotech they can barely comprehend, let alone repair. Every day, another system degrades. Every year, the Psyker sacrifice increases because the throne's efficiency is declining. The tech priests calculate in secret how long the throne can last. Their estimates vary, but all agree on one fundamental truth. They are running out of time. Another 1,000 years, perhaps two at most, before catastrophic failure becomes inevitable. And so they search. In the ruins of ancient civilizations, in Xenos tech vaults, in the data stacks of forged worlds so old their names predate the Imperium itself. They search for the knowledge that could save him, that could repair what is breaking, that could forestall the inevitable for just a little longer. But with each passing century, with each failed expedition and corrupted data file, the horrifying realization grows. There is no solution. The throne was never meant to last forever. It was a stopgap, an emergency measure, and it has been pushed far beyond its design limits. When it fails, not if, but when, the Emperor will die or transform or be released, and the psychic shockwave will be felt across the entire galaxy. Some believe it will birth a new eye of terror centered on Terra itself, consuming the segmentum solar and turning the heart of the Imperium into a demon-infested hellscape. Others believe the Astronomicon will die, plunging humanity back into the age of strife, isolated and vulnerable. The most optimistic predictions suggest that the Emperor's soul, freed from its prison, will be able to reincarnate to be reborn in a new body and lead humanity once more. But there is another possibility, unwhispered by the most radical elements of the Herusian faction of the Inquisition. What if the Emperor's death is not an ending but an ascension? What if 10,000 years of imprisonment, of constant psychic energy being channeled through his being, of faith from trillions of souls, has been charging him like a weapon? What if when the throne fails, the Emperor does not die but explodes outward, his consciousness expanding to fill the warp itself, his presence becoming so vast and overwhelming that he can finally fight the Chaos Gods on equal footing, a new god born from suffering and sacrifice, powerful enough to challenge the dark gods and perhaps even win, a divine emperor, no longer bound by mortal concerns, no longer limited by flesh or machinery, free to wage eternal war in the Imperium while humanity, his children, continue the fight in the material realm. It is a beautiful dream. It is also, perhaps, the most tragic thing about the Imperium, that even their hopes are built on suffering, that their greatest aspiration is for their God to transcend his humanity completely and become something that can never love them, never protect them the way a father protects his children, but only watch from an infinite distance as they struggle and die in his name. Gilliman understands this now. Since his resurrection, since he has walked through the Imperium his father built and seen what it has become, he has been forced to confront a terrible truth they have already lost. Not the war against chaos, not the fight for survival, but something deeper. They have lost what it means to be human. The Imperium is a rotting corpse animated by faith and fear, where entire planets exist only to produce soldiers, where billions live and die without ever seeing the sky, where human life has become the cheapest commodity in a galaxy overflowing with death. And the Emperor, whether he intended it or not, is the cornerstone of this nightmare. His protection enables the Imperium's cruelty. His existence justifies every atrocity committed in his name. How many innocents have been burned as heretics? How many worlds have been subjected to exterminatus because a single individual fell to chaos? How many children have been taken from their families, mind-wiped, and turned into servitors, lobotomized slaves whose only crime was being born with a minor mutation? All of it done in his name. All of it justified by the simple truth that without these measures, without this brutal efficiency, humanity would fall to chaos. And they are right. The Imperium is cruel because it must be. It is monstrous because mercy is a luxury they cannot afford. In a galaxy that wants only to destroy them, kindness is weakness and weakness is death. This is the Emperor's legacy, not the Great Crusade, not the dream of a unified humanity, but this eternal grinding machine that consumes souls and produces nothing but more suffering, more war, more death. A civilization that cannot remember how to build, only how to maintain. That has forgotten how to hope for a better future and can only pray for survival through another day. And yet, they endure against tyranids that can consume entire sectors, against necrons with technology that mocks the laws of physics, against chaos which offers transcendence and delivers only damnation, against orcs whose only desire is endless war, against Eldar who see them as vermin, against how it would strip them of their identity and force them into the greater good, against a universe that is actively hostile to organic life itself. Humanity survives, not because they are strong, but because they refuse to die. Because when a guardsman stands in a trench holding a laskin against a demon, when a sister of battle charges into a tyrant swarm with nothing but faith and a flamer, when a space marine plants his feet and decides that this line will not break, that this world will not fall, that this moment matters even if no one will remember it. In those moments, the Emperor is real, not as a god, not as a corpse on a throne, but as an idea, a promise, a defiant roar against the dying of the light. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that has always been enough. Perhaps the Emperor knew that humanity does not need a savior. They need a symbol. A reason to fight when all reason is gone. A name to scream into the void when everything else has been taken from them. If that symbol is built on a foundation of lies, if it requires constant sacrifice and eternal suffering, if it demands they become monsters to fight monsters, perhaps in this galaxy, in this grim darkness, perhaps that is the only truth that matters. The Emperor sits silent. He has always been silent. And perhaps in that silence there is wisdom that transcends the need for words. Perhaps he knows something that no one else can understand, that humanity does not need to be saved from the galaxy. They need to be saved from themselves, from their capacity for hatred, for cruelty, for the kind of evil that requires no demon's whisper, no chaos corruption. The evil that comes naturally, that flourishes in the hearts of beings who have convinced themselves that their survival justifies anything, any cost, any sin. The Imperium murders billions in his name. They would murder billions more if they thought it would please him. But what if he is not pleased? What if every prayer offered in desperation, every act of cruelty justified by faith, every child sacrificed to the God Emperor causes him nothing but anguish? What if his silence is not absence but restraint, the terrible discipline of a being who knows that if he speaks, if he acts, if he intervenes directly, he will only make things worse? That humanity must find their own way, even if that way leads through 10,000 years of darkness. There is a story, apocryphal perhaps, that circulates among the most ancient of the custodians. It speaks of the Emperor's last words before the throne claimed him, before the machinery locked into place and his voice was lost forever. He looked at his custodians, at these warriors who had never failed him, who had stood beside him through the darkest hours of the heresy, and he said, "Forgive me. Not I forgive you, not forgive them, but forgive me," as if he knew, as if he understood at the very end that everything he had done, every decision he had made, every sacrifice he had demanded had led to this moment. that the Imperium he built would become a prison not just for him but for every human soul that would ever live within its borders. That his dream of unity would curdle into tyranny, his vision of enlightenment into blind dogma, his protection into a cage so absolute that humanity would forget what freedom even means. And still, he chose this path, because the alternative was extinction. Not a noble death, not a heroic last stand, but simple erasure. Chaos would have consumed humanity slowly, soul by soul, turning them into playthings for entities that experience suffering as entertainment. The Necrons would have harvested them for spare parts. The Tyranids would have digested them into biomass. The universe, in its infinite cruelty, offers only different flavors of doom. So the Emperor chose the doom where humanity gets to keep fighting, where they remain themselves. However twisted that self has become, where they have agency. Even if that agency is expressed through acts of desperate violence, he gave them a chance, not a guarantee, not salvation, just a chance. And for 10,000 years, they have taken it. They have endured. They have fought and died and been reborn into a civilization that grinds them into dust, and still they continue. Not because they are strong, but because they are stubborn. Because humanity's greatest strength has never been wisdom or power or righteousness. It has always been the simple, stupid refusal to accept that they are beaten. The Emperor knew this. He was human once, after all. However far he has transcended mortality, however vast his consciousness has become, he was born from human shamans, carried human DNA, walked among humans for 40,000 years. He understands them in ways no Xenos ever could, in ways even the Chaos Gods cannot fully grasp. He knows that humanity will cling to hope even when hope is a lie. They will find meaning even in meaningless suffering. They will create beauty in the midst of horror, find love in a galaxy that offers only hate. And perhaps that is why he remains. Not because the Mechanicum's technology keeps him alive. Not because Psychers feed his corpse with their souls. But because he chooses to stay, because some fragment of his consciousness, some core of his being that remains human despite everything, cannot abandon his species. Cannot let go. Cannot stop fighting even when the fight has become indistinguishable from eternal torment. In the end, that is what the Emperor represents, not divinity, not power, not even hope really. He represents the refusal to surrender, the defiance that looks at a universe designed to break them and says, not today, not ever. You can take everything from us, our worlds, our bodies, our sanity, our humanity itself, but you cannot make us quit. Every guardsman who plants his feet against impossible odds carries that defiance. Every space marine who charges into certain death embodies it. Every citizen who wakes up in the Underhive and chooses to live another day despite everything is an echo of the Emperor's own stubborn refusal to die. The question posed at the beginning remains, what if everything humanity has sacrificed has been for a God who never wanted to be one? The answer is both simple and infinitely complex. It does not matter what he wanted. It matters what he is. And what he is, ultimately, is a reflection of humanity itself, their greatest virtues and their worst sins magnified to cosmic scale, their capacity for sacrifice and their talent for cruelty, their brilliance and their blindness, their love and their hate. The Emperor is humanity, concentrated and crystallized, and humanity is the Emperor, scattered across 1,000,000 worlds, each soul carrying a fragment of his dream, his nightmare, his eternal war. They are bound together, creator and creation, God and worshipper, father and children, locked in a symbiotic relationship that is equal parts salvation and damnation. And when the golden throne finally fails, when that inevitable moment arrives and the machinery can no longer contain what it holds, the galaxy will discover which aspect of the Emperor is stronger. The protector who united humanity and built an empire that spans the stars, or the prisoner who has spent 10,000 years watching his children become monsters in his name. Perhaps he will rise as a god of war, terrible and beautiful, bringing fire and judgment to chaos itself. Perhaps he will dissolve into the warp, his essence scattered, his consciousness fragmented beyond recovery. Perhaps he will be reborn, given another chance to guide humanity, this time with the wisdom earned through millennia of suffering. Or perhaps when the moment comes, he will simply let go, release his grip on existence and allow himself finally to rest, to pass from consciousness into oblivion, trusting that humanity, his strange and wonderful and terrible children, have learned enough to survive without him, that they no longer need a god to tell them how to endure, that they carry his lesson in their bones, in their blood, in their stubborn insistence on existing in a universe that wants them dead. The Imperium teaches that the Emperor protects, and in a sense, this is true. Not because he actively shields them from harm, but because the idea of him does. The belief that somewhere, entombed in gold and sustained by sacrifice, their father watches over them gives them the strength to face another day in the grim darkness of the far future. But perhaps the real miracle is not that the Emperor protects humanity. Perhaps the real miracle is that humanity protects him. That they maintain his corpse, feed his throne, worship his silence because they cannot bear to let him go. Because if he dies, if he truly ends, then they must face the terrifying truth. They are alone. In a galaxy of horrors, they are alone. And they have always been alone. The Emperor is not their shield against the darkness. He is their excuse to keep fighting it. And maybe in the end, that is enough. Not a happy ending, not salvation or redemption. Just continuation. The story goes on. Humanity endures. The Imperium persists, grinding forward through blood and faith and desperate, foolish hope. There is no peace among the stars. There is only war. Endless, eternal war. But in that war, in those moments when a human being stands against the void and refuses to break, something extraordinary happens. Something that transcends survival. That goes beyond simple biological imperatives. In those moments, humanity becomes more than the sum of their suffering. They become defiant, magnificent, unbreakable. The Emperor of mankind sits silent upon his golden throne. He has sat there for 10,000 years, and he may sit there for 10,000 more. He watches the Imperium burn. He feels every death, every prayer, every act of faith, and every betrayal. He knows what his children have become, what they have done in his name. And still he remains. Still he holds the door. Still he burns, consumed by duty that cannot end and love that will not die. Because that is what it means to be human. Not wisdom, not strength, not even hope. Just a stubborn, beautiful, tragic refusal to give up, even when giving up would be merciful. Even when continuing means suffering without end. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also this, the knowledge that somewhere, buried deep in the heart of every human soul, is a fragment of the Emperor. Not the god, not the corpse, but the idea that sparked humanity's greatest achievement and its worst nightmare. The idea that they matter, that their struggle has meaning, that somewhere in the vast and uncaring universe someone is watching. And maybe that is all anyone can ask for. In a galaxy that offers nothing but darkness, to be witnessed, to be remembered. To know that when they fall, when the battle is finally lost and the darkness closes in, someone will know they were here. Someone will know they fought. The Emperor knows, he has always known, and he will never, ever forget.